The last century, since World War II for sure, has been defined, as we know, by the car. And we've got this kid in the back going, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And the answer is no. And it's because we're stuck in congestion and highways and cars, and we're not going to get there. But if you listen to me and you get involved in supporting transformational transit, we can. And in the last 10 or 20 years, there's been a whole plethora of academic research and books that are talking about there's something special about cities. There's something special about the connectivity, the idea sharing that takes place in cities. And it's interesting because there was this book about 15 years ago by Thomas Friedman that said the world is flat. That said because of global communication and global transportation and air travel and stuff like this, we could go live anywhere we want. We could be in Parry Sound and be involved in banking at Bay and King just as much as we were if we were here. But you know what? He was wrong. Richard Florida put out a big report on that, a big critic of it, said the world is spiky and it's becoming spikier. And as the growth of London and New York and Toronto and major metropolises worldwide have occurred, in fact, it's been proven that the world hasn't become flatter. There's this need for us to get together, whether it's at a Tedex program or at a coffee shop at Bay and King or Wall and Broad or wherever it happens to be. We need to face-to-face interaction, and being off in all these remote places just haven't worked. Cities that are bigger actually have higher wages, higher wealth, higher GDP, more patents, more R&D, and it costs less to produce them. They become more efficient. There's less roads, there's less road service, there's less piping, there's less electricity, there's less grid. So bigger cities are more productive and more efficient. It's easier, particularly for two-income households, to work in an urban environment because they can go different directions. And you know lots of your friends that have a husband and a wife that are going different directions to work. It's been proven that it's more flexible and more resilient. If you lose your job in an urban environment, it's more quick to get a new job. You don't have to move to get it. There's more people that talk to that tell you, oh, do you know who is hiring here and who is hiring there? It's actually surprisingly more equity. In urban environments, it's easier to have a leg up and get ahead in life. And one of the reasons why is there's more entrepreneurship in urban environments than in suburban or rural environments. It's easier to start a job in your garage or in a loft or something like that. There's a livability, there's a sociability, it's easier to find a mate, it's easier to get married, and there's a connectiveness. On the left-hand side of this chart, which I think is the software of cities, it's all about ideas and entrepreneurship and connectivity and communication and cooperation. And today I want to focus on the hardware side of the equation. And you need both the software and the hardware. And the hardware, I believe, is these dense, mixed-use, higher height buildings where you've got this mixed-use environment so people can interact and they can get around with transit. And both of these end up influencing connectivity, which is, I believe, the key. Countries and cities around the world are doing this. Minneapolis, St. Paul has gone through a fascinating resurgence as they've created an LRT system that ties both cities together. Denver, a fascinating story where 20 years ago, they actually had this whole proposal that fell apart because people voted it down, and then the congestion got far worse and the city was losing population and wasn't growing. Finally, the metropolitan government got together, they financed it, and in a plebiscite passed a tax to pay for it, and Denver's on the tear right now. Portland was worried that the city downtown would become too congested and they wouldn't be able to have this livable environment, and passed a test. And it's interesting when you take a look at cities that have made this change, it's primarily because they have this compelling vision. In New York and Toronto, we sold this vision of congestion a little bit. I'm not sure that's the most compelling vision. Take a look at some of these other visions that people have sold. In LA, after the global recession, it was all about jobs and how infrastructure spending would be good for the people employed and good for the employment within the community. In London, it was that we're losing out as a global financial center to Frankfurt because it's taking half a day to get from Heathrow to the City of London. And we got to be connected to Heathrow and we got to be connected to the City of London if we're going to be the economic powerhouse that we want to be. And they've invested huge amounts of transit in London. So I think you got to have this vision, you got to sell this vision, and people got to get excited about it. And then to get you interested in some other ideas, think about the Caterpillar system. I love this. What it is, it's a monorail that goes one way on top and the monorail goes the other way below it. So you minimize the amount of space that you take it, and you put it right down the middle of a highway. Think about Huron, Ontario, or Finch, or Eglinton, if that was the kind of system that we built. Or gondolas. Columbia, Portland, Seattle and even New York City are actually thinking about gondolas that most people think only are any good at ski resorts. Why? Because number one, you don't have to buy a whole bunch of land, you just buy the pillars. They can go down hydro right of ways really easy. And as you can see, it's really good when you're going either up a hill or over water. Take a look at the left-hand side. Cities around the world are thinking about elevated rapid transit. And for some reason in Toronto, we don't like it. The SkyTrain in Vancouver, the SkyTrain at JFK, monorails in Miami are the ways that people are doing this. Why? Because it's 1/5 the cost of digging a subway. Subways, which are great, are expensive. And while it's more expensive than LRTs, it's a lot faster and people use it. Because one of the truths about rapid transit is if it's slower than cars, and typical LRTs and streets are slower than cars because they have to stop at traffic lights and they're in traffic, etc. If transit is slower than cars, guess what happens? People don't use it. You have to be faster than cars for people to want to make use of it. And then I love this, the hovering. People, cities worldwide are not only building cycle paths like we are, but they're separating them from roads so people feel safe, and they're building elevated interchanges so people feel safe and can quickly get around the city on bicycles. And then Uber, electric cars, shared cars, satellite-based air control, smart roads, etc. Some people think that smart vehicles, autonomous vehicles, are going to take over the system. And one person I went to argued that it's going to change the urban fabric because all of a sudden, you think about, when we had horse and buggies, everyone had a carriage house or a barn. And the biggest pollution was what the horses left behind. And then we went to the green solution at the time, which was cars. But what happened? We changed our urban fabric because we built garages, 2-car garages. You go down suburbia, what do you see? Garages. You don't see homes. You no longer have front porches. You don't even know who your neighbors are. And every single street has got 2 lanes of street parking beside it. We can get rid of all that with autonomous vehicles. No more garages and no more street parking. But it's not the solution to getting people downtown because you can't fit all those people in their own cars to come all the way downtown. But it could be the way you get everyone to the GO train station or the subway station, better than a meandering suburban bus that gets people to the GO train station and gets rid of these massive garages. Someone in the audience might correct me, but the biggest expense GO Transit has spent in the last 3 years has been not on GO Transit, but on parking. Elevated, huge parking structures. That's the challenge we got to get rid of. And I got to tell you, one of the biggest innovative things is taking, as I mentioned, Chicago's doing, New York, Paris, London are great examples, old passenger freight, passenger rail and freight lines, and turning them into surface subways. And what you got to do that is you got to get the freight off of the tracks to start with. In 1967, you took a look at the top right-hand side of this chart. We built something called the Eastern Freight Bypass that took the CN freight traffic off of the Lakeshore line, took it up north of the city. That allowed the GO Lakeshore lines to exist and the development of the railway lines just south of us here. In 1967, there was a proposal to do the same thing on the west and take the freight traffic off of the CP line north of the city. What's it today? 2018? Still hasn't been done. And if we did it, what it would do would free up the Mississauga-Milton line to become a surface subway. With 6 to 12 stations, it would be better than the Yonge Street subway. And that line, by the way, currently has more passengers per train than any other GO train in the whole system because you've got all those people that want to come to jobs. London is fascinating. They've got great trains that take people to London and great undergrounds that take people around London. But they came to the realization it was impossible to get across London. It took a day or half a day to get across London. And they said London, therefore, is no longer a city. It's a bunch of little cities because we're so fragmented because you can't get across it. So they're spending $18 billion building the Crossrail to get across London. Paris is doing a similar thing with the RER. Cities worldwide are building this connectivity across their cities because to the cities and around the cities isn't enough. Well, we've got this if you want. Taking the Western Freight Bypass I mentioned, this frees up the Midtown Toronto rail line for a beautiful thing that would go from Mississauga to Casa Loma to the Summerhill LCBO. Sorry, you'd have to get rid of the beer and the wine in the LCBO. It's a passenger rail station. To the Science Centre to Scarborough. Or it could go all the way from Cambridge and Milton through Toronto out to Peterborough because that's where that line goes. And one of the challenges we have in Toronto today is 97% of all of the GO train traffic either goes to or from Union Station. We don't have a network. We have this system that just brings people to Union Station or takes them from that. This would start to create a network. That's one of the keys that we've got to create. And then also, let me compare a bunch of other things. And I could do this not just with London. I could use Paris, I could use New York, and I could use a whole bunch of other cities, not just Toronto as the example. But Heathrow, it's got Piccadilly Tube, Heathrow Express, Crossrail, Overground, different undergrounds and rail that all service Heathrow. Charles de Gaulle, same thing. New York, JFK has got a SkyTrain going straight into it. In Toronto, what do we have? One, the UP Express, and the most popular bus route, the Rocket, that goes from Kipling. But we should have better service to the airport. Or the second largest employment zone in all of Canada, people are surprised by this, is the airport corporate zone. It's the area that is west and south of the airport. There's more employees working there than anywhere in Canada other than downtown Toronto. And Canary Wharf, a comparable kind of example in London, they've got Docklands ALRT, the Jubilee Expansion, and Crossrail. New York, Brooklyn and Manhattan are connected, or New Jersey and Manhattan are connected. Paris, La Défense and the Champs-Élysées are connected. People worldwide have realized if you're going to have two employment zones, you've got to connect them. In Toronto, we don't have any connection between downtown Toronto and the airport corporate zone. If you're a businessman and you got to meet a lawyer, it's going to take you an hour to come downtown to meet that lawyer, that accountant. We need that kind of activity. Or let's think about sports. Olympic Park in London, and it's the Olympics, so maybe it's a little bit different. They have 6 tube and rail lines that connect it. Have you ever tried to go from BMO Field to take the GO train? You've got to walk down this one little stupid corridor with a couple, 10, 15,000 people, squeeze up the other side and get on the GO train. It is abysmal. Or you got to wait to get on a streetcar that's infrequent and overcrowded. We could do a better job. And you compare most cities in North America, and they would be comparable to the right-hand side of this page. We can do and should do a better job. So what I'm trying to do is I'm suggesting by thinking about transformational transit, which yes takes money, but more importantly it takes people like you carrying a whole awful lot and getting involved in supporting this process. We can take the worst example of urban planning in history, which is suburban 6-lane roads with parking lots on the side of them and then 1- and 2-story retail. It is the most barren kind of urban planning that's ever existed into livable, walkable, beautiful urban environments like you see down below. And don't be worried, this isn't going to be everywhere. It is going to be on major arterials and at transit nodes. Think about the Yonge Street subway. On Yonge Street and at the major intersections, you've got height, you've got density. But half a block away, what have you got? Single-family homes. It's the same thing in New York. It's the same thing in London. Think about, it's actually fascinating. In poll after poll, people will say the type of housing they like is Bloris Village, the beaches, or Brooklyn Heights in New York, or Georgetown in Washington, or Kitsilano in Vancouver. Do you know what they are? They're 20 to 40 units per acre. Suburbia is 6 units per acre. Condos and apartments are 100 units per acre. You don't need that 100 units per acre to justify transit, but you do need that 20 to 40, which is actually the type of communities people like living in the best. And so together, I think we can change and build more prosperous, innovative, dynamic cities where most of us can be employed and our kids will have better opportunities. But to do that, we've got to think about inclusiveness, where everyone has good transit, and connections, where everyone's got a network of transit that will get us from where we work to where we live, and importantly, where we want to meet our friends, because that connectivity is so critically important. So how do I think we're going to live in the future? I think we're going to live in this mixed-use, dense environment that is denser than today, and it's more comparable to some of those communities that I just mentioned. And I think what that's going to do is that's going to lead to, as it has in New York, as it has in Boston, as it has in San Francisco, as it has in London, to more vibrant, prosperous, dynamic, innovative, employment-oriented cities. And how are we going to move? We're going to move with transit. But it's going to be important transit that's two-way, all day, frequent, comfortable, clean, electric, fast mass transit. That, by the way, is also the green and safe opportunity as well. What do we do to do it? I got a couple of suggestions for you. Number one, what we got to do is we got to get politics out. We can't have politicians say, I want a station here or a station here or a line here or a line there. We got to allow the people that know transit the best to figure that out. Number two, we got to have a customer orientation, not an engineering orientation. I had this speech from a number 2 guy at a big railway station who said the UP Express that goes to the airport made a huge mistake by stopping at York Street rather than going to Bay Street. And they did studies that they had a 20% less use by the people at Bay in Front and Bay at King, that were the people that were going to be using that UP Express the most, because they had to walk 2 more blocks. But think about that. If you've got a customer orientation, you're going to be thinking about those 2 blocks, particularly for a businessman that's trailing a thing, and particularly when his limo is paid for by his company. Is he going to grab a limo at Bay and King? Or is he going to walk to York and Front to get on, actually it's past York, as you probably know, to get on the UP Express. We got to have this customer orientation. Survey after survey says that people will transfer once. We're forcing them to transfer 2 or 3 times. We're asking them to pay for a GO train and then a TTC fare rather than having a combined thing. We have to have a customer orientation. We need civic support and less NIMBYism. Way too often, I could show you GO train station after GO train station where the local community disagreed with building the kind of mixed-use, high-density development I'm talking about, when that's exactly what should be right by the GO train station. And the only times that GO Transit are able to do it is when they got big parking lots they can convert. We need a business commitment. In London, things changed. Actually, London is a great example because in London, England, most people think is a great example of transit, no transit was built between World War II and 1989. What happened in 89 is actually a Canadian company, Olympia in York, Canadian businessmen, the Reichmans, sponsored research and said, we need Canary Wharf and we need transit. Everything changed. Business communities supported transit in London and things changed. We need the business community in Toronto, in Boston, in Montreal, in Vancouver, elsewhere across North America to stand up and say, we need this investment in transit because it's going to build the dynamic, innovative cities that we want. We need to be thinking about price, convenience, and time. There's this great thing about the S-curve in transit that says if you're more frequent, people will start to use it. When we went on the GO train system from every hour service to every half-hour service and therefore doubled the amount of supply, what do you think happened to demand? It went up by more than double. Because when people don't have to think about how long I'm going to have to wait, they're going to use the service far more. We need to have a network orientation. This isn't a freight system where we're bringing everyone to Union Station. It has to be we taking people all around the city. And even though I said politics is out on the top, in the end you need political leadership. Every city worldwide that's had great transit has had someone that's stood up and said this is the right thing and we can do it. And finally, most importantly, we just got to get on and do it, and we got to invest cash, and it's going to take cash. We got to be prepared for that, and we need your support to actually invest in the money. And if we do this, I firmly believe we will change our urban environment for the better and become a more innovative, dynamic, livable, sociable, wonderful urban environment that we'll all enjoy living in. Thank you all very much.